Morning. We're at the 1907 Harley exhibit. This is the one model, a single cylinder 1907. William Harley ran in the 1908 endurance run. The endurance run was basically developed, or set up or organized by the Federation of Motorcycles, to actually certify it as as far as the mileage and the speed and everything. So they started pretty well detailed as far as, all the stops and the distances that they ran, starting in Catskill, New York. I think there was quite a few motorcycles represented, Indian, NSU from Germany, basically all the models of those years. Harley had one advantage over some of the other models, is that they had the large flywheel. The large diameter flywheel, would give them the momentum for the hills and everything. So Mr. Harley, to bring this out to Catskill, had to bring this by railroad, bring this to Catskill, New York, to prove, Harley's worth. They didn't have a lot of presence on the East Coast, because a lot of stuff was either New York City or some of the major East Coast cities based. So he came from the West to come out to prove his point as far as the durability, the endurance of this single-cylinder motorcycle. So a couple of other things. Of course, it's belt drive. It had the loop frame. The loop frame would protect the engine. That was a pretty big deal for its time. He already had the gas tank over the crossbar, which to this day, the motorcycle's in front of the seat on the crossbar. The throttle cable is not yet a cable. It's a chain that operates the lever, but it runs on some small pulleys, to activate the throttle. So basically, we placed the buildings on his ride if they still stand. So somebody could take this route and actually see the different landmarks that still exist, starting in Catskill, where they took off, and then we go through Kingston. We think in Kingston they took the ferry to get across the canal. That would have been by Port Ewan to get to the other side, to continue down 9W. I think later that was called a turnpike. Marlboro, it then eventually turned into the Marlboro Turnpike, and then that ended up going past the Bombville Tree, and that would have ended up on Liberty Street in Newburgh. Liberty Street was already named, from after the Revolution, after George Washington had his residence on Liberty Street, so they made it to there. So basically, when he got to Marlboro and then got on the road, then he got into the different areas. Liberty Street, a lot of these buildings still stand. We have Governor Odell's house is there. Then he, down Broadway, he turned on Broadway going across, it might have been Clark Street. He went up and through St. George's Cemetery to get to the trolley line. The trolley line was on Renwick Street. So he goes down Renwick Street, or he goes down the trolley line, gets to the Quissaic Bridge. Quissaic Bridge was relatively new. It was built in 1883. So they did cross the Quissaic Bridge. Of course, we showed a Bombville Tree, Trinity Church, and then whatever else he passed, the restaurant's still there. So he passed, this is Knox's headquarters in New Windsor on Route 94. My grandmother was born there in 1901, Anna Smith, and I don't know if she heard the motorcycles in 1908, but she would have been 7 years old at that time, living there. Then they made it to Vales Gate and then on down, going down Route 32 to get to maybe Sloatsburg and then go across to the Hudson River to get the ferry. So it was all to do about the endurance by points and how well you did. The toughest part of the ride was in the Catskill area because Dan Hankey and myself, we took a tour leaving Catskill and then following, we could see the old roadbeds, from the 1908 run, and follow them and see the gorges and all the terrain that they had to travel. So that was a tough. If they got to whatever, by the time they got to Kingston, they had already had a lot of struggles, and maybe that's where he got some of his points and ended up in the front line. So, even though finished the first day, complete score, and all the ones, but a lot of detail for the day, and it was all published. So once people saw this as the endurance king of that time, they immediately, the sales increased for Harley. And the reason for, displaying this is to explain, the History Channel did an article on Harley versus everybody else. Harley had an ad in a magazine that said you could go 50 miles for a nickel. So the History Series program wanted to prove or disprove that ad. So we went out to Cobell Airport. Bruce Lindsay did a graduated cylinder, for the fuel. Of course, gas was only 20 cents a gallon, and it might have only been 15 cents a gallon. So there is a possibility that you could go that far on a nickel. And when it proofed out, no way you could go 50 miles for a nickel. But that's in the History Channel segment, which you'll see also, to prove that. But that's when Harley, they believe, made the jump to be, instead of being the West Coast or mid-country, they could actually do some business, on the East Coast. Naturally, Harley had Indian as the biggest competitor. And there was Merkel in Ohio, there was American Cycle, which would have been M&M in Boston. So, and in New York State as well, you had the ones that was imported into New York City, you had to compete with those. So, Harley made its case, and forever after, they had a good growth and, sturdy company.